Welcome to the Powercat Podcast, the original K-State sports show. Here's your host, Tim Fitzgerald.
Welcome to a spontaneous Powercat Podcast as we have some breaking news on the football side. Basically, everything that Cole and I thought might happen is happening. All the hires are internal. The only divergence from what we thought would take place is Drew Little is not the tight ends coach. They've created a new position for him as assistant offensive line coach. Brian Lepak moves to offensive line. Matt Wells is the offensive coordinator. Now they just have to hire a tight end coach. Cole, while this has gone as we kind of thought it would, I can hear people complaining about this all being internal hires.
Yeah, and if you're someone who's complaining about this, I would suggest going back and watching the Insiders that we did on Monday. And Clint Stewart made a great point. He said, as a coach, you want your people to succeed. And if your people are not succeeding, if they're not the most qualified person for the job at hand, then as a coach, you're not doing your job. And Fitz, you brought up a great point on Monday as well, is that's one thing that K-State has kind of had a tradition of, is taking care of their people, but not just taking care of their people to take care of them, but taking care of the people who deserve the jobs. And I think Brian Lepak is more than deserving of this job as offensive line coach. I love the hire, quite honestly. I think maybe the only pause that I would have had would have been, it might be hard to move him away from a tight end room that's had so much success. But then when you start weighing the pros and cons, would you rather your tight ends be good or your offensive line be good? I think it's pretty obvious that you need your offensive line to be good. And I think Brian Lepak is a rising star, and this is a home run of a hire for. Yeah,
you and I both think he's a tremendous football coach. And this is his background, folks. He is an offensive line coach by trade. That's what he wanted to be. And, you got to work those angles until you can get to your position group. And his angle was tight ends and fullbacks, became tight ends as K-State kind of worked their fullbacks out of their system. And he's done an absolutely incredible job. And if you've got a coach that's done an incredible job and there's an opening on your staff that fits him, you promote him. That's how it works. That's how you build loyalty and continuity. We just went through kind of an upheaval of having a new offensive coordinator and kind of a new system in ways. And now we're not going to see that for a second year in a row, because Matt Wells is going to move over there and he's been part of this system and part of the play calling. And I think it'll be without skipping a beat, Brian Lepak's got huge shoes to fill. Connor Riley is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. He's certainly in college football, and the Cowboys snapped him up. So this is such a positive for Kansas State. It gets, like, you lose a tremendous coach in Connor Riley, but you get to promote and keep a young, talented coach that, honestly, I think is going to be a brilliant offensive mind. I think he's the next offensive coordinator at Kansas State if there's another move. You've got to keep moving those guys up. Clint Stewart's exactly right. You got to reward good employees that need more room to grow. You need to repot the plant sometimes, and now they've done it with Brian Lepak. Cole, I do it with my staff. You just moved up into a position that has had two people in it for 30 years. And that's because you're moving up, not just because it's convenient. You're moving up because I prepared you for this as best I could. And at some point, when you're training a firefighter, you got to throw them in the burning house. Well, welcome to the fire.
Yeah.
But I've done this for years. I know it's no comparison to a giant football program that has budget to hire people from outside. But I love all these hires, and I'll be intrigued to see where they go with tight ends. I think Chris Klieman will probably go into his history of the many coaches he's encountered through his 30 years of coaching or whatever it is. He's old. He's not as old as me, but he's old. He's met a lot of people, and I think he's going to bring in a tremendous coach. He knows how important those tight ends are. He knows how important keeping the continuity of that tight end room is, because not only do you have Lincoln Kier coming in, but there's a guy in Great Bend you're working on. And you can't have upheaval of that position right now.
And I think part of it too is, just because you're coaching the offensive line doesn't mean that you'll never interact with the tight ends. And so I think honestly, part of the reason that Drew Little got that promotion is, you want to take care of him. But also, to me, this kind of leaves the door open for Brian Lepak. Hey, Drew, why don't you take care of the offensive line for this session? I'm going to go over and make sure that the tight ends are doing what they're supposed to be doing. We're going to bring the tight ends over for this session of practice. You're going to focus on the offensive line, and I'm going to watch the tight ends along with coach, whoever they bring in. So it really wouldn't surprise me if part of the reason they promoted Drew Little to assistant offensive line coach is because they do want Lepak's voice heard. And it honestly wouldn't shock me if, for at least for the first year or two, that the tight ends spend a lot more time with the offensive line because, let's be honest, tight ends are offensive linemen by trade. And so I really like the idea of bringing on an assistant offensive line coach. Honestly, Fitz, it wasn't something that was really on my radar. I don't think it was on anybody's radar. I thought they might just have Drew Little coach tight ends and fullbacks like he did at UTEP. But I love the idea of using the rule of endless coaches to your disposal. And you're right. Now they can go out and they can bring in the outside voice that, if you're listening on the podcast, I just did in air quotes that everybody wants. Okay, that's fine. Go bring in the outside voice and see what happens.
Yeah. One of the things I always noted about Kansas State's tight ends is they evolved into this offensive weaponry. Tight ends at K-State have gone through phases. Bill Snyder used to use them all the time in 1.0 and 2.0. They were, Travis Tannehill had his moments, but for the most part, they were blockers.
Mm-hmm.
And the evolution of that position now is more of a modern pass catching threat tight end. But with that, you can't ignore the functions of a tight end as an extension of your offensive line. And I always was struck that Kansas State is going out and recruiting guys that can catch, guys that can run, guys that are a threat downfield. And Lepak is turning them into blockers, because I haven't really noticed severe blocking issues at the tight end spot, because it can be glaring. If a tight end's overmatched by a defensive end, it's ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think K-State's tight ends have done a pretty damn good job in the blocking category. Are they 100%? Hell no, nobody is. But I think Lepak has shown that he can take players and turn them into strong blockers. And now I want to see what he can do in developing offensive linemen from the ground up. The dude's got his hands full. I think Connor Riley knew his offensive line was in transition this year. They brought in 3 guys from the portal. They've got some young guys. They're trying to restock that position and really get some size and mobility. It's a position that requires a lot of player development. And when you're Kansas State, you're often getting offensive linemen who need another 40 pounds, 30 pounds. And so it takes some time and patience to build up the bodies and the techniques. I think Lepak's capable of doing that.
The one thing that made Connor Riley so great was his relationship skills. I mean, He was an outstanding relationship builder, as all coaches need to be, but him specifically, I think that is something that we can't overlook, because the relationship he had with those guys, let's be honest, part of the reason he's with the Dallas Cowboys, I cannot help but believe that Cooper Beebe had a say in this. I mean, essentially the quarterback of the offensive line says, I want this guy to come be my offensive line coach. I'm sure that there were those conversations, right? And so I'm interested to see how Lepak builds those relationships. They're 2 very different individuals. Don't get me wrong, incredibly smart individuals. Brian Lepak is one of the smartest people in all of college football. Different than Connor Riley. I haven't seen him use the colorful language that Connor had used with the offensive line. I'm sure he's going to have to do that, but just different personalities. And so it's going to be different for those guys. They're not going to be used. They're not going to hear the 4-letter word maybe as much as they used to when Connor was around.
Getting back to Brian Lepak, if you don't believe he's smart, I'll sue you, and he'll be my attorney, because he has a law degree from the University of Oklahoma. It's incredible. You get a law degree and you go, nah, I'm going to coach football, because it's in him. This is what he wants to do. And I have so much respect as someone who did the same thing. Yeah, I can go make some better money and go over here and do this, but I won't be happy. So this is a great way of keeping him around. And, there was a lot of rumors in this offseason as Oklahoma transitioned their offense into new hands that he was going to go to Oklahoma. Now that got shot down. But I'm just telling you right now, this dude is going to be someone that others will want to hire. And so I'm sure going over the offensive line got him more money, certainly got him more responsibility. And as I said, Cole, I think he's the next guy in line to be the offensive coordinator if you want to keep that continuity and not have to reinvent your system with an outsider. Because I think if Matt Wells is here long-term, like extended, it's because he became the head coach and Chris Klieman stepped down and retired, which I know you don't want to think about, fans, but that's going to come. And we're going to see coaches retiring a lot earlier than they used to for two reasons. One, the job sucks now. You're basically a professional general manager trying to manage salaries, and the transfer portal is just a train wreck. NIL is a train wreck. It's all part of the job now. There's no denying that. You've got to be good at that. And plus, let's be honest, coaches are extremely well paid. They don't need to work 20 years to build up a savings. They can work 5 years as a head coach at the power level and build up that savings. So we're going to see a lot of that movement around, but I think Lepak is a really strong keep because let's be blunt. If you hadn't done something with him, you were going to lose him.
Yep.
He was going to get an offer, and now he still might. He still might get an SEC offer. Oklahoma might come calling, and you might lose him, but you tried. And that's the best you can do is keep guys around that are of value to your organization.
And I'll say this. I think that having a younger offensive line with a younger offensive line coach is going to be a good thing. And I think that there's going to be an interesting dynamic that exists there because some of those older guys could handle Riles, right? Like Cooper Beebe and Duffy and Hayden Gillum, they'd give it right back to him, right? They could handle that. I'm not saying that the younger guys couldn't handle that. And because they all have talked glowingly about Riles, but this dynamic now with Lepak and a younger offensive line, there's going to be some kinks, right? Like it's not going to be 100% right out of the gate. Is that going to be Lepak's fault? No, it's not necessarily going to be his fault. But I feel like as a younger offensive line coach trying to prove something, there might be a little bit more of a give and take there.
I agree.
And so I think this is just a really, really good hire for all parties involved.
I agree. I'm really fired up for it. We'll stay on top of the tight end position, see what's happening there. I don't think we're long from getting an announcement. The only curveball on that is I don't know what the status is of K-State's ability to announce hires. In the past, it's been like this window where they had to wait for the job to be posted unless it was an inside hire. I don't know if that's still all in place in this modern era, but if it is, we're going to have to wait a little bit. But if it's not, we'll figure it out. And then again, an agent will leak it to one of the national reporters and we'll have the information before K-State can release it. But that's just how it works nowadays. Any final thoughts as we head out of this one and I just go record a whole different podcast on baseball?
I don't know. That sounds like a good idea, Fitz.
Well, let's do it. That's it for this brief edition of the Powercat Podcast. K-State has its new offensive line coach. He was in the house the whole time. Brian Lepak moves up, and Drew Little, one of my favorite guys that played at K-State, just a tremendous person who's been, at an analyst that's helped with the offensive line, now has a title and the salary to go with it as an offensive line assistant coach, and that's pretty cool. We'll be back with another edition of the Powercat Podcast very soon, like I think tomorrow.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.